Alright, folks, alright. Inna alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulih al-Mustafa wa ala ibadi alladhina irtada wa man bihudahum ihtada wa bi athari ahli al-Madinah iqtafa wa ba'd. Fasalamu Allahi ala al-qawm. Ahlan wa sahlan bikum wa marhaban once again to MindTrap with Mufti Abu Layth. We've got an awesome, spectacular show for you tonight, inshallah. An esteemed guest I'll be bringing on shortly that will shed some light, some tranquility on a matter that's been disturbing quite a few people recently with the whole controversy that has been aroused on the nature of the Quran. What is the actual, the existential nature, the metaphysical nature of the Quran? What about these variations, the ahruf, the qira'at, all of these things? People are asking these questions time and time again. So before anything, I'm just doing an audio check to make sure that the sound is coming through fine. If there are any issues, I will just amend it imminently, but I take it that the sound, I'm just checking with my Facebook gente. Right, I'm just getting a clearance there. Okay, excellent. I can see that. Right, all right. Audio is all going through fine. Excellent, excellent, people. So bringing up first of all for you a profile picture. That before you people, you can see is the legendary Dr. Shehzad Saleem, an absolute master in this field, a specialist on Quran sciences, on the variation and the compilation of the Quran, what is called Quran in Arabic, a fellow of Ghamidi Saab's Mawrid Institute and Center of Teaching, and somebody who's very close to Ghamidi Saab himself. Right, without any delay, let's Assalamu alaikum, Ustad. Ahlan wa sahlan, and welcome to MindTrap.
Walaikum assalam. It's an honor to be with you.
Right, I'm really grateful that you've taken out this time to really enlighten us. So I have to, from the bottom of my heart, first and foremost, shukran, shukran. I deeply appreciate. I can imagine only how busy you are. Folks, I've reached out to Dr. Shehzad Saleem after watching some amazing lectures on this topic. And to be fair, I thought, you know what, I wasn't expecting you to get, I thought, oh, my message might be totally drowned out and it'll take forever. So I was so glad, I was over the moon when Dr. Saab got back to me. Dr. Saab, for our audience who are not too, some of whom may not be too familiar with your work, just a brief overview. So I'll just to kind of start it up, and then I'd like you to expand if you could. I know Dr. Saab will be humble, but he's done some groundbreaking work in this field. He's done a whole PhD. This you can see this major book right there. That is the history of the Quran. A critical study, part of which is a PhD study that's spanned many years, took Dr. Shehzad across different countries, different research. But from this journey in brief, Dr. Saab, with the deen, this connection, and then on to Quran studies, could you tell us a bit about that?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, it all started in 1999 when I was called upon to teach Quranic studies at Mawrid, our institute, to graduate students. So when I started teaching Quran, part of that teaching was to introduce the Quran to the students, which of course included the language, the history, the background, the genre, the arrangement, the coherence, so everything was what comes by the name of Ulumul Quran. So one part of that was, of course, the history of the Quran. And I thought it would be the most easiest sailing, because we know that the Quran that we have today is preserved to perfection, dot for dot. And so that's the end of that. I would not have much to say. But when I started preparing that for that subject about 20 years ago, I was really dismayed, to use a very soft word. I was shocked because I had a lot of queries that built up in my mind, and these questions arose because of the way history of the Quran was divulged in our history and hadith books. And I thought that I would not be able to teach this course because, gosh, I cannot answer these questions which stare me in the eye. So how can I satisfy other people? So I made this commitment to myself that once I'm through with the course, this was about 6 months, I would do my best to find out the answers. And so from here began my journey in November of 1999 when I finished that course. I said that I must have the answers, not to explain it to others, but to my own self, because being a believer, I need to find out how and why and when of this whole thing happened. Why is it that we have multiple versions of the Quran? We know that there are at least 5 of them extant. One that we know ourselves, which is the Hafs version, which is prevalent in about 97% of the Muslim Ummah, but that there is 3%, and there are about 11 countries which include that 3%, which have 4 different versions of the Quran. When I say different versions, of course, I refer to the fact that the words are different. Then there is this word order at times, which is different. Then we have, although these differences might not be very significant as far as their meaning is concerned, although there are some others as well which have a significant change of meaning as well, but still the claim that the Quran was preserved word for word in one format had that claims seemed to literally shake in its foundations. So this was one of the major questions that stared me, and that took me actually to one of the North African countries, Morocco, where we have the Nafiz Qira'at, or Nafiz reading, or Nafiz version of the Quran, so to speak. And they have been reading this Quran for 12 centuries. And for them, the Quran of Hafs, the Quran that we read, is equally good, and the Quran that they read is equally good, as you will be knowing in your own scholarly approach. But to me and to my students, and of course to many other people, this was quite disturbing and alarming. And then, of course, there were other questions as well. For example, we know that in Hadith literature, there are Hadiths which tell us that the Quran that we have is incomplete. The Rajim verse is a very typical example. It is called Mansukhu Tilawa Dunul Hukum, which means that it is there.
Yeah.
Just the recital has been abrogated. Then we have the suckling verse, which the mother of faithful Aisha said that the Prophet had just died, and they still read that verse in the Quran, and we know that it's no longer in the Quran.
Yeah.
So a person like Aisha reporting that. And then, of course, there were several other questions, like, for example, the compilation, the way the Sahaba went about. It seemed as if it was a haphazardly sort of done thing. Things were not preserved properly, and they were gathered on the basis of 2 witnesses. On the one hand, we stake this claim that every person had the same, I mean, it was an all-pervasive sort of a thing in which all people remembered the Quran, and there was not even a need to call on 2 witnesses. But here we find 2 witnesses being testifying, and then verse being put in, and we find Umar coming up with the Rajam verse, and because he was the only witness, his witness was not accepted because he didn't have a second witness with him. So the question arose that was this the way of compilation of the Quran in which just 2 witnesses were called, and whatever they came up with was accepted. And then, of course, the Sahaba's codices.
Yeah.
For example, codices ascribed to Abdullah ibn Ubay, Abdullah ibn Masud, Ali Ta'ala anhum, all of them differed with each other as they have reported in our history books.
Yeah.
And then there is an entirely new, I would say, color added if you look at the Shiite version of the collection of the Quran, which is diametrically opposite to the Sunni version, and it has its own story to tell. So these were the questions. Of course, I've just mentioned a few of them that led me on this quest, on this fascinating voyage. And it was days and days of.
That's amazing, and I have to say that you've this book seriously is. I feel that it's I mean it really is underrepresented. I don't know how long has this been in print, by the way, in circulation. I just got hold of it very recently.
Yeah, it's here for about 6 months, I would say. It was published in November of 2019, so it's about 7 months.
Mm-hmm. It is an immense study, honestly, and I've got through about 40% of it, and I have been loving it. The amount of research, and not just from the theory, from the contemporary approach, the transparency angle, the hadithi level, the discussion on asanid. For anybody who, I suppose there's different layers of people. There's people who just want an understanding. That's fine. But for somebody who's a bit more serious about the topic, and they want a very kind of like a broad, detailed overview, not just an overview, an analysis, then definitely history of the Quran. And I would, inshallah, at some point like to, go over as much as we can of this in the future, if we can,
Hmm.
because there's just so much to discuss. But Dr. Saab, right now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this discussion has become very relevant since over a week or two. And what's happened is it stems from an American scholar who has a huge following, Shehzad Saleem, and he gave an interview. And in the interview, because he comes from a very kind of a Salafist background, so most of his, and he's probably got, I think he's got like 1 to 2 million probably followers or something, but he, even though he has drifted from that mainstream Salafist hardline approach over the years, but he still, that is his kind of crowd. Now, because in an interview recently, he had the question sprung upon him, and he said that look, we can't. There's problems with saying the Quran is preserved, and our traditional narratives fail us. Now, this sent kind of shockwaves right throughout all his audience, and then by extension, other people, because what happened is a lot of not only Muslims, a lot of Islamophobes or Orientalists or ex Muslims follow him. So they took that clip and everybody started doing a discussion on it. Oh, Sheikh Yasir Qadi has admitted the Quran has problems. Now, people like Jay Smith, for example, has done several discussions already on it, saying, look, see, even one of the major Western Muslim scholars has admitted this. So this has sent a lot of the regular public asking their local scholars, please explain to us the nature of the Quran, because we're confused. So, and you're obviously an expert, and you've got a perspective on this, which I believe is in line with Ghamidi Saab's perspective, if I'm correct. So I'd like us to, stemming from a simple question and then kind of opening it up and going further. A simple question, which Muslims would like to know from the very offset: is the Quran preserved? And then what do we mean by preservation? And then following through, we can kind of elaborate. So over to you, Dr. Saab. Is the Quran preserved?
Yes, I would say absolutely it is preserved. And the Quran that has been that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam 14 centuries ago, we have it exactly in the same way as it was revealed, dot for dot. And the verses have been preserved exactly in the way they were revealed, in the order they were revealed, and there is no doubt about it. The only question is that there are some other versions circulating by the name of that they are Quran too, and we have variations in single verses. So they merit some separate explanation, because as soon as I say this, that the Quran has been preserved, the question arises that where did
Yeah.
that Moroccan Quran come from, or from where have these Qira'at originated? So I think we have a very cogent answer to that. And but since your question is that is the Quran preserved, I would say 100% it is preserved, and that is the actually miracle of the Quran itself. And not only the miracle, it is the thing which differentiates the scripture, the final testament, so to speak, from the Old Testament and the New Testament, which are preserved in their translations. We don't have the originals, neither the Hebrew of the Old Testament nor the Syriac of the New Testament. They are all in their translations. In fact, they are copies of these translations. And the only distinction which the Quran has, or the edge which the Quran has over previous scriptures, is that it is preserved in its original language. Now,
Sure.
as the question, of course, as I said, is because of the fact that people like Sheikh Yasir Qazi, whom I actually met just last year, he invited me
Okay.
to the institute, and I gave a talk to his final year students, and he himself was present
I
in that
believe
talk.
that's on YouTube, I believe.
I am not sure about that because
Okay. I saw
I don't
some
think that
pictures
it was
of it
released.
anyway, with you sitting
Maybe,
next to
maybe.
Yasser Qadi on YouTube.
Right. So
Okay.
I don't think it has been released because there are some people who were asking me, and I was directing all my queries to that institute. I said that you can go and ask them, but maybe it has.
Sure.
So I think that Sheikh Yasir Qazi is a very, I would say, a phenomenal scholar. He has a very sharp brain. I've discussed things with him. We had our differences, but
Sure.
I think it was in a very friendly way that we discussed those differences. And it's like thrashing out an age-old problem.
Of
So I
course.
think that it's just a question of answering that some of the questions which I
Sure.
myself was faced with, that
Yeah.
where did those other Qurans or other readings
So,
originate?
before we just get into that, Dr. Saab, I'd, so we've got a simple thing. First of all, the question at a simple level. Okay, is the Quran preserved? Categorically, you're saying it is.
Yes.
Now, before we get into some of the questions, now you have a holistic perspective, which is, if I can say this also, Ghamidi Saab's perspective, I believe, if I'm
Absolutely.
correct in that. I don't
Mhm.
want to misattribute something to him.
Basically, he's my supervisor and teacher, especially. So, I can say that my work. In fact, if I go a little more broad, I would say my work is actually an explanation of Hamiduddin Farahi's thesis on the collection of the Quran and, of course, the transmission, which he put forth about 100 years ago. And Ghamidi Saab is a student of one of his students, of Farahi's
Students,
students.
yeah.
So it's like presenting the works of Farahi, Islahi, and Ghamidi,
Right.
and then elaborating some more details and incorporating some more contemporary details in the works of these three scholars.
That's amazingly put. So there is this legacy
Right.
of coming right down from Allama Farahi Saab right down through Islahi Saab and then Ghamidi Saab right now. In a paragraph before we begin expanding, what is the view that you espouse about the Quran? So, as opposed to the objections and the counter theories, just your theory or Ghamdi Saab's theory, what is this? When you say the Quran is preserved, how would you put yours, just to be clear on it, and then we'll expand on the other problems and objections that people may have?
So the Quran was primarily preserved verbatim through the oral lore, I would say, and orally through memorization. The Quran was committed to memory, and thousands of the Sahaba they committed it to memory. The Suhuf were secondary because you see, in those times, the diacritical marks and the vowel marks, although they were present, but they were sparingly used, and everything that was written followed that oral recitation. So the primary mode of recitation, if we talk about it in very secular terms, is that a very large number of people memorized various parts of the Quran, some of them whole parts, some of them partially, and then they transmitted that oral recitation to the next generation. So it was like a generation to generation transfer. It was not like a few people transmitting to a few people, and precisely this is what we call tawatur in our I would say religious terms. Although the term tawatur is not just religious, it's historical, which means that such a vast number of people transmit something that their collusion on falsehood is virtually rendered illogical and impossible. So it was like saying that thousands of Sahaba committed the Quran to memory and passed it on to the next generation and to the next generation. And this is like a pyramid, which is continuously coming down and expanding its base. And the topmost pyramid, the topmost section of the pyramid itself, consisted of such a large number of people as you can say that it was safely and securely transmitted to the next generation. And since then, this process has been continuing on and on. And this is something very unique to the Quran because you'll not find any other book being committed to memory in such a large number and then being transmitted. And the written recitation was actually which followed the oral recitation. So whatever you were speaking or whatever you were reciting was put to the pen and the paper or and various instruments of those times, and it always needed the testification or the testimony of a hafiz to say that whatever has been written is correctly written. So you see, it was basically a novel way of transmitting something, the Quran, I would say, which was, of course, not very novel in the culture in which the Quran originated. You would be knowing that the Arabs basically, they were people in whom orality was a very common thing. So they would have these genealogies learned by heart. Abu Bakr
Yeah.
himself, anhu, was a genealogist who had all these genealogies in his head. and they used to rely on this memory, on this religious memory. So this is
Absolutely.
how the Quran was
Even
preserved.
even some people today, like I was listening to Professor Keith Small, who's also somebody very involved in Quran kind of manuscripts, and he was saying as well that it's very clear from how the early manuscripts are that it's very clear and evident, self-evident, that there was a very strong oral tradition, and this was simply like a kind of code to help people, to nudge them along. It
Hmm.
wasn't actually something like people trying to. I mean, I just thought that's a very. It just goes in with what you're saying. So, okay, so the oral tradition was there. This part, okay, I think very few people would doubt that. The Prophet ﷺ, in his lifetime, the Quran is complete and it's being taught to the companions. He passes away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What, in your belief, happens then? In as part of this paragraph, before we expand on the some of the maybe the difficult objections or problems.
So you see, a very unique method was adopted in the transmission of the Quran. So if you ask me what happened at the death of the Prophet, or what was the status of the Quran at the death of the Prophet, I would say that it was with the living tradition of the Muslims. It was being written, it was being taught, it was being read, it was being memorized, it was being done like a comparative text as well. So all kinds of things which are which living tradition of any religious community would have was possessed by the Quran. So at the time of the Prophet's death, there were students of the Prophet who had written it down, but the Prophet never left an officially compiled written Quran. That he never did.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very wise thing as well, because protecting something written is not easy. All things can creep in a society where we have so many things, and the custody of that Musaf would have been very difficult, and over a period of time it could have just rotten away. So this was just partly adopted.
Yeah.
That written culture was there, but it was never relied upon, and the Prophet never gave a written sort of a Quran to his companions. The companions themselves wrote it down for themselves. So it was basically like students taking notes, and then all of them comparing those notes to each other and coming up with the same result. And the way the Prophet himself received the Quran was oral. He never wrote it down for himself. We know that he was not conversant with reading and writing. So, I mean, not writing, he could understand. So he just got it from Gabriel. And the way he got it from Gabriel was that oral tradition. And he transferred it exactly in the manner that he received it from Gabriel. And this is how the Quran was transferred. So the stories that what the caliphs did after the Prophet's demise, like for example, did Abu Bakr write a Musaf or did Osman made copies? I think they are grossly inflated and misrepresented and misinterpreted. All that they did was they just spread the Quran, which was already there, being responsible caliphs of their kingdom. They wanted it to expand and for new Muslim converts, and there were wars going on. There were people coming into the folds of Islam, and they wanted more copies of the Quran. So what they did was is they spread far and wide these copies of the Quran. But the stories which are mentioned in Bukhari and in some of the other hadith books regarding how the Quran came to be compiled, I've shown in my research that they lack not only in their isnad a lot of problems, but in the content as well.
Yeah, there's a
So,
lot of conflicting
right.
narrations as well, and you show that so well in the book. Right, so just you said, Doctor Saab, that you said uh, Jibril alayhi salam is orally transmitted to the Prophet. The Prophet is orally transmitting word for word. So just to be clear, in your understanding, the Quran, did it have flexibility in its words? Like, so when we're reading a verse today in the Quran, when the Prophet was reading this, are you espousing the opinion that it was absolutely fixed? The word is as the word is today, all of the words.
Yes, I do, but there is a little explanation perhaps that would that is in order, because to understand this, I would say yes, and just to explain how I say yes, I would say that the history of the compilation of the Quran is something which the Quran itself has spoken of. So you see, when you talk about the collection of the Quran, you first go to the primary source, which is the Quran itself, and this is precisely what Hamiduddin Farahi did when he pointed out Surah Qiyamah's verses 15 to 19. He said that these verses, "Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana, fa iza qara'nahu fattabi' Qur'ana, thumma inna alayna bayana." These point out to the fact that the Quran was revealed chronologically and then it was recompiled in a different order. So the words are "Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana." These various parts of the Quran which have been revealed piecemeal in installments. The Almighty is assuring the Prophet in a Meccan surah. You know that Surah Qiyamah is a Meccan
Yes, of
surah,
course. Yeah.
and the Quran was in the process of its revelation. So whilst dispelling some doubts which the Prophet had in mind, or maybe allaying some of his fears, the Quran goes on to say that don't worry, O Prophet. It will not be given to you in one go. It will be given to you in various installments. And then it is upon me, the Almighty says, to collect it. Inna alayna jam'ahu. I will collect its various parts and then read it. Wa Qur'anahu. I would read it in a different order because the chronological order and the order that we have today are different. فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. So when I reread the Quran in the final compilation, you are bound to follow that final recitation. As
Wow.
far as the
Okay.
chronological recitation is concerned, you have to abandon it. Now, what has happened is that the remnants of that chronological recitation have persisted. And the biggest source of these extra Quranic readings is that chronological sequence or that chronological reading in which the Quran was sent down. And then when it was recompiled, some of the tenses were changed, some of the word orders were altered. And of course, because of the fact that it was to be given to the rest of mankind, certain settings were changed. But
Okay.
the chronological order was also preserved because the people, the Sahaba, they did not want to give it away because they thought that whatever they've heard from the mouth of the Prophet, it must be preserved. So we have a case of a parallel transmission of it's not the exact chronological order, I would say the remnants of the chronological order. So from there originated the Qira'at. And as far as the complete recompilation of the Quran is concerned, that is the Quran that we have with us today. So
So
what we have.
just to before that part just kind of evades us. So the chronological order of many people will know that the chronological order isn't how the Quran is eventually compiled or put together, because the Makki surahs aren't always in the beginning. Most people would know that, but we're saying that the qira'at, or you're saying that the qira'at originate, or they find their origins in the previous, like it
Right.
was
So
revealed first and then it was reread.
right. So since I'm saying that one of the major sources of the Qira'at, maybe 70%, is that the revelatory sequence, which was abandoned. And as we know that a new sequence was given to the Quran, and we know that the Ahadith also corroborate this when they say that in the final Ramadan of the Prophet, he actually revised the Quran with Gabriel twice, and he actually sat for itikaf for 20 days instead of the normal 10 days, and the Quran was revised between him and Gabriel twice, so that the new order of the Quran could be preserved. And this happened every Ramadan. This revision of whatever would be revealed in that year happened in every Ramadan. Only in the last Ramadan, the whole rearrangement or the whole complete order was preserved, and that was passed on to the Ummah. Now, what happened is that some of the Sahaba insisted that because of the fact that they've heard the previous Quran as well, or some of the parts of that Quran, so we would not give it up, but we would like to have it preserved as maybe an archival thing, a very prized possession that they heard from the Prophet. And they were very clear on this that it is not part of the Quran, it's just of historical importance. But later on, as things went down, their students of their students, this distinction got blurred and things started to mix up. And the Quran, or the parts of that revelatory sequence, which were just meant for maybe their record, started to be thought of as they were the Quran themselves, as they were Quran in itself. And hence we see that a number of readings, a number of recitations, they resulted. And then what happened was that in the times of Shafi'i, now a Risala was one of the premier books of Shafi'i, he said that it is incumbent upon every Muslim scholar to accept what is revealed through ilmul khassa. So there is one which is called ilmul amma, which is meant for everyone, and then there's this ilmul khassa, which he was referring to the hadith, that some of the knowledge of the Prophet, which is being transferred by the ahad or the akhbar ahad. So they must also be preserved, and scholars must learn them and must have a very deep appreciation of that. So this opinion of Shafi'i was also accepted, and what happened was that phenomenon of dual transmission came into being, in which the original Quran was transmitted by the
Right,
masses,
right, okay.
and the scholars, the scholarly people, they started preserving that revelatory sequence. And later on, as that preservation went on, the distinction line between what was the real Quran and what was just the remnants of the revelatory sequence, it got blurred. And we find that the Sahaba saying, "Oh, the Prophet read this verse, this like this as well,"
Sure.
without knowing that at times that these verses were actually being explained in Arabic by a Sahabi, or at times they were of the previous sequence. So this is one of the ways. And then we have some other issues as well. Thus, for example, there are similar passages of the Quran, and any Hafiz will tell you that there are so much similar passages in the Quran that if you are not a very sharp, don't have a very sharp memory, you tend to mix up similar
Yeah.
verses. I have traced that in my book as well, and I've shown that how at times similar passages became mingled up, and the readings which were ascribed to readers, like for example Nafi or Hafs or Asim and the rest, they were basically the result of intermingling of two similar passages,
I
in
see.
which one word was inserted. For example, the very simple example would be, we say that the Quran has "Inna Allah huwal ghaniyul hamid."
Yeah.
So the same verse is present at another place, which by the words "Inna Allah al ghaniyul hamid." The "hoa" is not there.
Yeah.
So there are several places with "hoa," and there are certain other places without.
Right. Okay, I
You'll find
see.
out they have been
So
switched.
there's like, because of this kind of tashabuh mutashabih in the
Example,
lafz,
yeah,
they
in the
are
last,
taking it across.
yeah.
Right. Okay, just to kind of keep the steps so people can also kind of keep up. That first and foremost, what we're saying, or sorry, what you're saying here, is in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, Quran was being revealed naturally in whatever relevant order it was to the circumstances. But as the verse of the Quran had taught, Allah had already taught the Prophet that, look, when the time comes, we will give it its absolute structure. So inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'an. So we will, and فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَ. So once we have laid out the sequence, then follow it. Now,
It
at
says
the
follow the new sequence. The
yeah, the
important
new
point is
yeah
Faiza Qara'ana, which means that when we read this
in the
afresh, you
future,
follow this
yes,
fresh sequence and abandon the previous one.
of course. So
Now,
at the
just one more thing I would
of
like to
course,
point out is that if this is so simple, I mean, anyone can ask that why didn't people follow this verse of the Quran? The answer to that also is that Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'anahu is not interpreted the way Farahi Sahib interpreted it. And they interpret this verse in a different way, our traditional scholars, and they actually rely on Abdullah ibn Abbas's Asr in his hadith, in which he has a different meaning of Jam'a, and the word that he actually takes or he actually interprets is that the word Jama means that the Quran will be etched in the heart of the Prophet. So it will be collected in the heart of the Prophet. And this is how they proceed. So just giving you a
sure,
preemptive
no,
answer,
no,
because
absolutely. So what I was going to say is that, and then what you're saying is at the end of the Prophet's life, in the final Ramadan, he repeats the entire Quran, this time twice over,
right.
in now the divine sequence. So
Yeah.
you're going with the understanding as well, just to be clear, that the sequence in the Quran, the Tartib al-Suwar, is what the Usuliyin call Tawqifi. It is divinely set, that Allah has set this, and
Right.
the Prophet read this to the Muslims in his final year twice, and and in this reading, when it was read to him, some changes may have taken place in pronouns
Right.
and things like
Hmm.
this,
Right.
as not through the Prophet but through revelation.
Right.
So this was in contrast to the previous, let's say, pronoun differences, part of the origin of what becomes the qira'at complex
Absolutely.
later on. So just to make sure, okay, so we've got that up to speed. Okay, right. Now, and part of what also has added to some of the qira'at differences with where words are actually different may
Right.
have been the tashabuh, the kind of
Right.
overlapping between
Similarity.
certain verses.
And I can point out two other sources as well. So one of them is what we call the tafsiri qira'at. You see, what happened was that the Sahaba would teach the Quran as well, and they would place a synonym while explaining a Quranic word. And what happened is that in many instances, if you look up, for example, the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shayba or of the Razak, you'll find out a Sahabi typically teaching someone and telling them that, oh, this word means this. Fas'au means famzau. So what happens is that the meaning that they would tell itself became a qiraat. And the teaching of the Quran, in which a Sahabi was simply explaining a Quranic word by replacing it with a synonym, and that synonym actually became a Quranic verse in itself, because they thought that the Sahabi is telling us that, oh, you can read this verse like this as well.
Yeah,
However, the Sahabi never went that. He was just explaining that this word means that. So that is the third source.
yeah.
And a fourth source which cannot be ruled out is concoction. You see, in the second or third century, just as ahadiths were concocted, they were fabricated in large numbers, we know for various reasons.
Yeah.
So this concoction also cannot be ruled out. And I think these are the four major sources
And
which have
just
resulted.
and just to add to your your third point, like in the Sana'a palimpsest that you have, the manuscripts, for example, one thing that's been pointed out before as part of Surah At-Tawbah, there was Bismillah, it said La taqul, like the
Mm,
person had written La taqul. I mean, that kind of manifested in part of the research, and it was, well, that wasn't revelation. These clearly seem to be the notes of the
mhm,
person saying La taqul Bismillah.
mhm.
He'd
Right.
so that just where people are adding notes themselves. Okay, so we've got this, okay, in the sense that the understanding is, look, the Quran was revealed, it was rearranged divinely at the end of the Prophet's life. There may have been certain syntactical variations that were revealed at that stage.
Mhm.
So, there's this verse that, oh, sorry, there's this hadith, not verse, that everybody brings up about unzil al-Quran ala sab'ati ahruf. Is this hadith just baseless? Is this what you're going with, or is it that it has a different interpretation or something?
So I think before explaining, I'll just put before you the conclusion which Suyuti, one of the famous scholars of Ulumul Quran and of course Hadith sciences, has put forth, and he says that this is from among the mutashabihat, the meaning of which has yet to be known. It is an ambiguous narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and I have shown in my one of my chapters
Yeah.
that all these explanations of the word ahruf, there are basically 40 different explanations of what the word ahruf actually means. And I have taken about 7 or 8 major of these interpretations and shown that how they are inconsistent and how they don't actually match even the Arabic of the word ahruf, the way it is translated. And then I've also worked on the isnad of these ahruf narratives
Yes.
and shown that not only the marfu ones, but the mawquf ones, of course, the mawquf mean the narratives which are reported by the Sahaba, they are not soundly reported. Although the question still may arise that even if all these narratives are not soundly reported, there has to be some kernel of truth, because so many people are saying so
Because,
many different
yeah,
things.
they claim it's mutawatir. I was just going to show, in case some of you thinking, what on earth is Mufti doing? Why is he looking down? I'm just going to show, to some extent, from the book for you, like just as in just holding it, that this whole section is really, as you can see, almost this whole chunk. As you can see, that this, what I've got in my hand there, is dealing with really the variations, the sab'at ahruf, then the asanid, and then each of the ruwat and the different interpretations. I mean, in great detail. But I mean, the question is that, is this? It's definitely confusing to people, but is it? Are we saying it's made up? I mean, some people will say, but so many people transmit it.
Well, you see, what happens is that it's not necessarily made up. The Prophet could have said something about the Quran which was probably misrepresented and misinterpreted. the way we find many other narratives. These days I'm working on these narratives regarding the return of Jesus, and they also proliferate. We find them in huge quantities from the Sahaba, maybe in excess of 25 Sahaba narrating them. And here as well in the Sawatul Ahruf, we find more than 20 Sahaba. But first, we need to understand that the narration of more than 20 Sahaba does not make something mutawatir. Tawatur is not what actually personally I think, which is basically called by the Asuli Hadith scholars as tawatur. But I subscribe to the definition of tawatur, which is put forth by the Asuliyin,
Yeah,
which is the real definition, which means a
of
large number
course.
of people. It's not just 5 or 10 or 15.
Yeah, and to be
So
fair, that the hadith scholars in early Islam for the first several centuries didn't have this term tawatur in their books. It's actually introduced
it's
much
yeah,
later. Yeah,
much later. So I think that there is maybe an explanation, and I did not actually I didn't want to explain that narrative because I think that any explanation is more of a guesswork, and it
yeah,
may be as educated as a guess could be, but it revolve the whole debate or focus the whole debate on my interpretation of
yeah.
what the prophet had actually said. So I refrained from going to that.
You
I
did. Yeah,
just
yeah,
I just withheld myself and said that neither the text is worthy of any attention because it has so many contradictions, and the isnad are all jumbled up. The
yeah,
famous narratives of the Umar narrative by Hakim and Hizam, it has a number of problems, and the Ubay ibn Ka'b narrative has a number of problems. So I restricted myself to point out the fact that such contradictions, as you know, cannot simply make a case
yeah,
for the and as our scholars say, إذا تعارضت سقطت. So
yeah.
whenever two things they clash with each other and they cannot be reconciled, so we just have to do tawakkuf and just we have to just drop them
because
unless.
because I kind of like got to that part, and I've been really going through this book, believe it or not, as much as I can every day. And I was going through that part, and I was thinking, right, I want to get to your take on it. And it was, and at the end, you're right. You actually don't really give a. I mean, you give, I suppose, a take, but it's not
Mhm.
like you're not trying to dominate a narrative. You
Right.
simply ended on what you're saying, that look, this doesn't really have much to stand on. Like, so there seems to be some discussion, there seems to be these transmissions, there's a lot of contradictions going on. Really, there's not much we can take away with substance from this discourse. You kind of just leave it with that, really, as you're
Mhm.
saying. And yeah, and I thought, well, okay, that's very interesting. I mean, would you not argue then, or could one not argue, Sheikh, that you see there are so many transmissions in, let's say, the books of hadith, the books of sunnah, the books of in of history and all different things about varying recitations and people reading the Quran different. Like you said, the incident of, let's say, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and I know you have an amazing, very detailed. I was quite shocked how detailed it was with Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, and this whole thing about Mu'awwidhatain, and some very amazing points you made on that as well about his students. But with all these narratives exist without them, I mean, without going into their minute details, but one kind of consistent fact is people are saying that people seem to be disagreeing on the 100% entity of the Quran. Like, they agree on the Quran, but they seem to disagree on its certain things. Like, some people saying this ain't from it, that ain't from it. Now, wouldn't they just hide this fact? Like, why would Muslims even transmit this? Because this is not coming to us from today Orientalists. I mean, they're bringing some factors, but really the bulk of everything is coming from our own sources. It's coming from our book saying, by the way, Hisham ibn Hakim, this is how he read, Umar disagreed, this is what Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, this is what he said, Ubay said. Our books are saying this. So why not just cover this up? Because Muslim scholars have at times, not to digress the discourse, but like, let's say you mentioned about the Jesus thing, and I personally agree. I'm also of the view with, like, what Ghamidi Saab is, that there isn't a second coming, and you get scholars like, let's say, in the past, Ibn Hazm, who says that they disagreed on this. ثم اختلفوا هل سيعود قبل يوم القيامة أم لا. but yet their names seem to have been buried. Like scholars just buried it. They didn't transmit it. Why did they not do the same here then?
I think that's sheer honesty. They didn't mince words. I think that whatever was the truth, whatever was the reality, just brought forth. This is very similar to the fact when you see that we have certain scribal errors in the Quran, and this is something which every single scholar acknowledges. For example, we have extra alifs, extra wows, extra yas, and they were so confident that even if they preserve those errors in writing, because the orality is so strong, that people will recognize them that these are errors, and hence they are marked by a circle so that people know that these have been erroneously written. But because they have been written by the Sahaba, you say, okay, we'll just preserve it in writing, and we know that they are wrong. So I think it's sheer honesty that they transmitted the rest of the Qira'at as well, and they didn't hide it, because ultimately the thesis that they I would say worked up was that they also somehow are part of the Quran, and they form some historical connection with the Quran that we have. So I think it was their own purity of intent, which even today exists, and which is, of course, a matter of very singular amazement that why is it that we have this phenomena of a parallel transmission. But this goes to speak volumes in favor of the fact that if you analyze that 20-year period or 22-year period in which the Quran was revealed and then rearranged, so these variations were bound to exist. I mean, had the Quran been given the same sequence as it was revealed, that was the final sequence, perhaps you would not have had any variation, because could have been preserved as it was revealed. But because it was recompiled, it was given a new order, a new sequence, and some changes. There had to be these left out things, or these remnants which were there, and they were so dear to the Sahaba that they thought that because they have heard it from the mouth of the Prophet and they have some significance, so they'll just not do away with it. And they did not realize that this would become a huge problem later on, because something which is of historical significance would be mingled up and would become part of the main discourse.
You know what I also feel, Dr. Saab, is that I feel that the early generations, like for especially what is called the Salaf, usually up between the to almost 200 years of Muslims, at least, up until the Atba' Tabi'in, Imam Malik's age, that kind of age, I feel that they were also a lot more secure with their faith in certain things. Like these things didn't, like it didn't kind of shake their faith as much. Like I'm sure like it was a challenge, but it doesn't, like, I feel that with time, as institutionalization came in to Islam, I mean, this is my thought. I mean, I'm just saying that I feel that people became very insecure about anything challenging a narrative. But yeah, I mean, because I do find it really strange that all of these things which are so challenging for people today, they actually in our sources well discussed in the early, to the extent that, and people disagree. Like, so people felt that, no, there were multiple readings, there were different things, and they weren't really shaken by this. That's I just find that very
Right.
quite
So
bewildering.
you're right in a way that they were so confident that they knew that the reading in the masses is so well established, and even like today, you find these this Qira'atul Amma, which the Qira'at that we read the Quran on. Actually, it was called the Qira'atul Amma by our Salaf. So they were so confident that this Qira'atul Amma will be all pervasive, and it will infiltrate far and wide, that even if these singular readings are transmitted, they will just be on the sides, on the margins. And of course, this was the case, and this is the case even today. So whenever I give a talk to people who are not aware, they say that this is the first time that has come to their knowledge that there are other readings as well. And I said this is design, because the transmission of the ilm al-khassa, which is of course these qira'at, was confined to the scholars. So even today, only the scholarly community knows about it.
So
As far as the masses are concerned, they don't have an
just
inkling.
and just for people to know that this term al qira'atul amma, from what I've understood is what you're saying is that it's like a proto qira'at. It's
Mhm.
pre these qira'at, but it is the reading of the Quran. It's called the general. In Arabic, it just means the general reading or the common recitation, al-qira'atul amma. This existed, and this was the Quran, and this is the Mus'haf we have today.
Exactly.
I've understood this correctly, have I?
Right.
From
And this name was given by the Tabi'un to this reading. For example, Abu Abdul Rahman al-Sulami, who lived in the first 100 years, he was the person. He said that this is how we were introduced to the Quran as the Qira'atul Amma, and he said that the reading of Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, Ali, and the Muhajirun and the Ansar was one, and it was dubbed as Al-Qira'atul Amma. There was no difference, and it was being read this way. So you can see that in the first 100 years, there was absolutely no problem. And even the ahad which were being transmitted were just marginalized. They were just sidetracked, the qira'at. Later on, actually, these qira'ats surfaced because of the fact that this distinction between what was the canonized version and what was the non-canonized version, this got somehow mixed up. And as I said, Imam Shafi'i, when he said that ilmul khassa belongs to the scholarly tradition made it upon themselves that it is incumbent upon them to preserve this ilmul khassa. So that preservation is what we find in our tafsir books, in our qiraat books, in our hadith books, and in so many books, but never in the masses. In the masses, the only qiraat that we find is al-qiraatul amma, except. Now there is an exception, and those 11 countries which have a different Quran, of course, and these 11 countries have 4 different Qurans. So I went there to Morocco, and I found out that this was actually the work of a ruler in the 3rd century who was the Qazi of Kirwan, who said that at a certain point of time we will adopt this particular reading. And the reason for that being that Imam Malik, the fiqh of Imam Malik was in vogue in the North African continent. And Imam Malik preferred the reading of Nafi, which is a different variation of the reading that we have. It's different from the Qira'atul Amma. And they said, okay, because we prefer Malik to be our faqih, he's our jurist, and Malik prefers Nafi, so we'll adopt the reading of Nafi. So this is how the reading of Nafi got imposed in the African continent in about the 3rd century, the later part of the 3rd century, and ever since then it has been going on. So the only exception are those 11 countries in which a different recitation of the Quran was imposed by the authority of the state. Masses don't have this ability to accept or reject. So when you do it from the top, it's like an interference in which people said, okay, this variation is something that we will accept.
okay.
So this is how things went on.
To kind of like compartmentalize that for our viewers, that what you're saying, Sheikh, is that we've followed through that. Look, the Quran came through in this particular way. It was called the Qira'atul Amma. It was one particular recitation. These things, by the way, for those people that don't know, these varied readings or these variants are called qira'at, popularly known by the 7 readers, and then from them you've got 2 further people transmitting, 14 in total, and some people have taken them up to in their 20s, 30s, and even up to 50 different recitations that existed. But there was a scholar called Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid who kind of popularized these 7. Now, what you're saying is all of these 7, first of all, these are not mutawatir qira'at. Something which personally I do agree with that as well, that these are not a mutawatir. They're not on the same level as the common qira'ah. The second thing, all of these variations, if I've understood you correctly, Dr. Saab, you're saying that these are all in essence ijtihad. Is that
so you see, in order to trace the history of the qira'at, that's slightly a shift to what you're talking about.
Okay,
if you want,
okay.
So the history of the qira'at can be summed up by saying that, for example, just as in fiqh we had these great scholars like Abu Hanifa, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and Imam Malik and Shafi, the 4 major schools of thought, and of course the Jafris as well. So in a very similar way, there came this time in around the 2nd century or the early 3rd century when very great qaris, or the reciters, they were invested with this privilege that they could choose between the various readings which they had inherited from the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, and they were called the Sahibul Ikhtiyar, which means that they could choose. Before them, people had different readings coming from the same Sahabi, Abu Abdullah ibn Masud saying something, regarding one verse and another thing regarding another verse. So what happened was in this third century, when these famous seven reciters, which were, as you said, rightly chosen by Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, they formed a whole system of qira'at in which what they did was that, for example, one person called Nafi, he chose a single reading which amongst many other variations. For example, from Alif Lam Mim to An-Nas, each verse would be having different variations. So he came forward and he set his own criteria and he chose one, or he preferred one variation as a holding preference to all the same for each verse. In this manner, we got a systematic seven variation possessing Quran, in which each of these Sahibul Ikhtiyar, they chose on certain criteria that I will choose this reading. If, for example, if a verse had seven variations or six variations, so typically Imam Nafi would say, okay, I choose one of them, and this is my reason of preference. And for the next verse, if there are three variations, okay, this is my preference. Of course, that preference was that singular thing, the single principle, but he applied that principle to all those recitations and came up with a single version for each verse, which
So,
was his preference.
so just to clarify to for some people who maybe not so privileged to fully understand the discourse, that in the time of Uthman radiallahu an, when he had laid out a kind of template for the Quran, it was a consonantal kind of template, which, because of not having vowels, could be read if you try to read it. Let's say you could read it in a different way. Like if I, it's not a good example, but like it approximates. Like let's say today text message language, WT would be what, but it could be wit, it could be wet, it could be. Now people would normally know if I said what you doing, they they wouldn't think wit or wet you doing, but if somebody who wasn't maybe privy, they could start reading it differently. Is this and then people are sometimes inheriting these varied readings by people, and certain people are choosing, they're kind of like saying, well, I'm adopting this part from this person, this part from this person, and they then get quite popular with it. So Nafi as an example, and Asim as an example, Asim ibn Abi Najud, and different people, Hamza and Kasa'i, these several, but let's say seven, who become really popular, they end up becoming the kind of the vocal piece for a particular select reading. Is this what we're saying? Yeah, Dr.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. But here comes the question that, okay, so from these seven, let's say, and there may have been many more that were doing it, but these seven who get popular, you've got another, like this kind of two reciters from them. Now, there's Hafs, who takes this person who kind of recites from Asim, and this is the main reading of the Quran today. Now, Asim does have another student as well, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Ayyash, who would have some variations. How does Hafs and Asim from these 14 become the correlate for what is the Qira'atul Amma, and the other 13 miss it? How does that happen? Because that's a huge question mark. It's the elephant in the room.
Right, right. So my teacher Ghamidi Saab actually has tried to solve this riddle, and his I would say his thesis is that Hafs was the only person who read the Qira'atul Amma without adding his ikhtiyar, without adding his preference from the various choices that he had. The rest, they added their ikhtiyar, they chose from different readers, from different Sahaba, and they made up their own selection. Hafs was the only person. So before actually I elaborate on this, let me also just
wow.
point this.
Okay, that's very, very, very fascinating, because I didn't
Yeah.
have that answer before. Okay,
So
carry on. Yeah,
these
sorry.
readers were actually very adept. They wanted to have the lahja of the Arabs. So all of them, they copied the Arabs. You'll see that most of them are non-Arabs. They're from different countries, from Iran, from the across the nations. So they wanted that the Quran should be read in the lahja, in the accent and the dialect of the Arabs. So they would have this pronunciation as close as they could, and each of them had their distinction. And what each of them did was that not only they had their own lahja, which they thought they would be copying from the Arabs, so each of them also exercised his ikhtiyar. which, of course, as I said, was the choice that they had in selecting from various readings. It appears that Hafs was the only person who did not, and this is expressly stated in history as well, that he just presented whatever was the reading of Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, of course, who was some he inherited from in the times of Usman, the same reading on which Usman had guided people on the Musaf. So he's the only person who maybe tried the lahja. He tried to teach people in the lahja of the Arabs without adding any ikhtiyar, without adding any preference.
But here there's a question that that would be faced with, when if saying that, and that is that obviously these people, they are exercising this license to kind of choose from here. This talfiq, what in fiqh they call talfiq, like choosing,
Yeah.
like let's say I want to pray, I'm going to take this part, I'm going to put my hands here like the Shafi'is, but I'm going to do this like the Hanafis, I'm going to do now. By them doing that demonstrates, without stating it, the fact that they believed that that was something permissible to do.
Right, absolutely. So you see, this is one of the reasons that these qiraat were given sanctity, or they were regarded to be sacred, was the hadith itself, Anzul al-Quran ala sabatu ahraf, because one of the interpretations of sabatu ahraf is that there are 7 variations amongst the qiraat, 7 different types of variation. For example, in wahid jama, for example, in taqdeem ta'khir, for example, in the vowels coming in at a certain place. So one of the reasons which sanctioned these qiraat was this hadith, according to them. They said that the Quran has been revealed on 7 ahruf, and these are basically ahruf that we have. And the next part of the hadith says, فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ, which means that you can adopt any one which is appropriate for you. So this is the choice which was given. The only thing is that it was not given to everyone. Only people of insight were given this. And as you said, that Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid only selected 7 of them. Before them, we have Tabri actually selecting 30 readings. We have Abu Ubaid Qasim ibn Salam selecting 25. So there were different people who had. The only thing was that because in Baghdad he became very popular, Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid, and he was also a state emissary. He had a state position as well. So his selection and his choice was as if it was being adopted by state authorities. So it received a lot of impetus, and hence you find that his choice prevailed. And because of the Unzul al-Quran Sabatu Ahraf Hadith, and because of the fact that they were receiving various narratives which had these Quranic verses piecemeal, so they said that, okay, on the one hand, we have the permission from the Prophet which says, read any of these 7 ahruf. And on the other hand, we actually have those ahruf in data being before us. So we are just applying this hadith on that data and choosing فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ the way we would like to.
Sure. But there's still another interesting question here. If we take this understanding of, let's say, the qira'ah was always one, and then it correlated with Hafs and Asim, and that's a very good explanation why, because I was thinking, how would you get past this point, and you did get past that. That's definitely, and so I didn't know that response before. But there's an interesting question here, though, Dr. Saab, and that is, you see, so for example, the lahja or lughat Quraysh, okay, the lahja of Quraysh, now where the Prophet was originally Qurashi, from Quraysh, now they wouldn't pronounce the Hamza in many things. So this is why Nafi', for example, doesn't pronounce the Hamza. But some of the traditions that we see where, let's say, sometimes they say Abu Bakr or sometimes they say Uthman, when they were compiling the Quran, they said, when you disagree and Zayd disagrees with you, فَاكْتُبُوهُ بِلُغَةِ Quraysh. Write it as Quraysh, like Tabut is an example they disagreed on, and they said, look, write it how Quraysh would say it. So if this was going back to how the Prophet himself would have read it and it was revealed to him, we know generally most linguists would write that the Quraysh never used to say their hamzas on a lot of the words. They would kind of blend it just as a vowel. So like they wouldn't say mu'min, they would say mu'min. Why is Hafs and Asim is clearly not that Arabic? It's one that pronounces the hamza.
You see, as far as the lehja is concerned, it has nothing to do with the preferences of the Sahaba. which means the qira'at themselves. This is just a way to pronounce. It's like the talaffuz. It's like what makes a qari out of someone. As far as the variations that themselves are concerned, whether you pronounce it as mu'min or mu'min, it doesn't change the meaning. The word is it just has a variation in pronunciation. It's like zorf and zarf. The word has a morphological variation. The word is the same, but you have different pronunciations. So you see, the important thing is that lahja could be anything. The word does not change. But in the qira'at, what happens is that the word changes. You see, instead of huwa, we don't find huwa. Instead of rab, we find maybe a pronoun. So you have to make this distinction that in lahja, the word never changes. It's just the manner in which you pronounce the word which changes. But in the qira'at, it is it is the word which changes. So here comes something more significant. I
No, of
can
course, of
easily go
course.
along. For example, you're a person who lives in Britain. You have an accent of a British Englishman, and if I go to Australia, they'll be speaking English, but they'll be speaking English in a way that they would twist and they would prolong certain words. But the word itself would not change. It's
Of
just the
course.
manner in which you actually pronounce that word. So pronunciation is something which is acceptable, but the change of words is something which is really significant, and it of course means that the word has changed. It has
No,
not
but
been preserved.
my point, yeah, I mean, absolutely. The kind of question more hinged on if they were trying to do it exactly how the Prophet did it. Presumably, the Prophet would have read like how without hamzas and things. Presumably, this
Mhm.
because this is how, if we're saying that this qira'atul amma goes back and everybody really just wanted to read how the Prophet read and it was only in one way,
Mhm.
then why is the popular one, let's say the Hafs and Asim or the qira'atul amma, not like the dialect? Like, it's like, imagine I had something and people said we want to do this exactly how Mufti did it, and we
Mhm.
want to speak just like Mufti, and we're going to write in just the way he wrote. But then years later they're actually writing it as
Mhm.
pronouncing it in an American way, but
Mhm.
attributing it to me. um I'm curious, like, that question,
Right.
that why
I
not
think
do exactly
okay.
how the Prophet.
Because you see, this is one of the areas in which this leverage was given to you. You were allowed to make this variation. As I said, the words zorf and zaf exactly have the same meaning,
Of course,
but
yeah.
the morphological difference just a way in which the same word is given two different sets. So I would say that even if the lehja here is not preserved, the word, because it does not change, it's more of tahseen, the way we speak the word tahseen, which means that how you do it in a beautiful or in a better way when you are pronouncing something. And another thing which is important is that also whether the Quraysh did not have Hamza or not, this itself needs to be established, because this is an assumption which has been put forth, and I wouldn't say that this needs to be examined further. That the Quraysh, lam yahmiz, as it is
Yeah.
said, that they would not do it with Hamza. So in the first place, I think that needs to be examined, and in the
Sure.
second place, even if it is established, I would say it has something more to do with the tahseen, or the way which things progress. It does not change the word. The important point is the word should not change, and even if there's the variation which the Prophet himself allowed, then that variation is acceptable.
Because one thing that because many years ago when I was studying, not this particular issue, but I struggled linked with this. I struggled with this whole thing, so I did a lot of research into, why was the default Quran not reflecting Lughatul Quraysh? But then one of the understandings I kind of arrived at was that there was a kind of standardized Arabic form,
Mhm.
which wasn't like, so when the Prophet was speaking formally, it was on that standardized level and it wasn't on their kind of local level.
Mhm.
So just as, like, let's say in Pakistan today, when people want to speak formally, they speak Urdu.
Mhm.
Otherwise they might speak their, I mean, that's slightly different because they've got other languages, it's not just a dialect. But in a similar, some kind of approximation analogy, that there was this standardized Arabic which did have the Hamza, even though presumably Quraysh may not have, used the Hamza much. But when the Prophet spoke for people in general, or the Quran being very formal, it came in the standardized Arabic. I don't. That was something that I kind of
Mhm.
eventually settled with, that understanding after reading so many different things.
Mhm.
Yeah. But okay, so if we're taking this approach, let's say, um, this, uh, all these manuscripts today. I know there is a whole. You've got a whole section on manuscripts in here as well. All of these differences, all of these things to do with the extra pronouns, the replacement of words, like things like, let's say, tal'in mamdud or tal'im mamdud, or whether it's fruit or whether it's bananas or whether it's, these kind of zaqiya or sayha, these kind of words that are completely different words. They're not even though there's similarity in meanings like maliki yawmiddin, that kind of stuff. What this is all it's in essence like the person's best attempt. That's what you're saying. It's not the actual recitation.
Right. So you see, as I said, this the important thing regarding recitation is that the word should not change. The way you pronounce that word is something of a variation, which is allowed, which is something which is, I would say, a very natural thing, because you're not always reading as if you would read English like the King's English or the Queen's English. You would have that variation. A Pakistani or a Sri Lankan or an Indian would have his own accent. So I would say the word accent is a better representative of this whole thing. The accents are something which are always something which is of a leverage which is given to us. The important thing is that the word must not change. And in the Qira'atul Amma, you'll find that the word has not changed.
Sure,
That is
but in all these manuscripts where they have got word differences, like based
right.
on these qira'at and other qira'at as well, that people are bringing today. Like I know, and it's not like some let's say Islam critics today on YouTube. They will say, look, we've now got 30, I think 37. They're saying
Mhm.
we've got mushafs, and look,
Mhm.
they've got variations, and this is this. In essence, your response to this is that you're going with the approach that, well, these were all ijtihad. The real absolute one is just one, which is what we have in main, what is prevalent, Hafsan Asim, if I can call it Hafsan Asim. Um,
So
that's what you're saying.
So what we are saying is basically that these manuscripts were bound to exist, because when people started reading on these variations, it was but natural to have them written down.
Yeah.
So if people start discovering these manuscripts which have, for example, the reading of Nafi or the of reading of Asim or Hamza or Kisai or Abu Amr, it's but natural, because they just did not preserve these qiraat merely through their oral tradition. They wrote those musaf down. These masahib existed. The only thing is that when they wrote those masahib, it was not just purely ijtihad which played its role. Because you see, there is one group of scholars which say that we cannot do ijtihad on these things, and the sanction of the Prophet must be there. So you see, the criteria of the qiraat, if you just delineate those three criteria, one of them is that the Arabic should be correct. The second is that sahha sanaduhu, that it must have a chain of narration which goes back to the Prophet,
Yeah.
which in other words mean that you just cannot do ijtihad. I mean, the ijtihad part is in which you prefer one reading over the other, but you just cannot have a reading which is, it is like saying that, okay, it's my own reading, and even if the Prophet never read it, or the Sahaba did not read it, I can do ijtihad, because people have been doing this as well.
Yeah.
So ijtihad is only on that part in which you have a reading whose sanad goes back to the Prophet, and you have more than one reading of the same verse. So you're doing ijtihad by preferring, or the reason you have for that preference,
And
that is
yeah, and just so people know that, in this topic, in this whole, and this is, as you can, as many scholars, it's baffled so many scholars, but this whole arena to do with qira'at, variations, the Quran, the language, the qurra, the ahruf, the harshest people against, or that have been the harshest, I don't know if that's the right word, but that have been very, I mean, they obviously, it doesn't mean they're anti-Islam, but harshest critics have been Muslims in the past. You'll find a lot of the grammarians from Basra were
mhm,
very kind of, in fact, they even mocked some of the Qur'an. So Abu Uthman al-Mazini, for example, he mocks a huge grammarian, huge, like coming just after Sibawayh and people like that. He, in the generations just after him, he mocks people like Nafi, says Nafi was not even a true Arab, didn't know Arabic properly. They mock Hamza as
Hamza
Zayyat. I
also,
think
yeah.
they say
Hmm.
he made a grammatical mistake in the Nahu of, because he separated the mudaf and mudaf ilay and put the maf'ul in between. So they say, I think the qatla awladihim shuraka'ahum. So he kind of splits this verse by saying, putting qatla awladahum shuraka'ihim. And they said, "What on earth is this? This guy doesn't even know Arabic." And they were really the Basra, which today actually standard Arabic is probably like 90% based on Basri grammar. But they were actually so harsh in criticizing. And it was much later grammarians like Ibn Malik who were very embracive, and they were embracing the Sunnah as well as evidence and stuff. But yeah, I just want to mention that point that these people had been very critical of these Qurra. So okay, I mean, I want to ask you. I'd like as well if we can take a few questions from people that are asking. I'll read them out. But before we come to that, if that's okay, Dr. Saab, I want to ask you. Look, this. By the way, for I have said to people, obviously, I'm not sure if you're aware. I wouldn't think you are aware. My own position on this has been slightly different. Although have agreed and do agree in view with Ghamidi Saab on many things, and agree with him that the qira'at are not mutawatir in that sense. My view has been that the Quran was always dynamic, and it was meant to be dynamic, and that meant in some ways there was flexibility with it, and this does disturb some people today. But it's like how Imam Malik, and you mentioned it in your book as well, that Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and I think you even put, I think Ibn Taymiyyah as well was of the view that there was flexibility to the extent that that some companions could substitute words. They could say, well, there was a word that was easier for them, they used to substitute it, and that was one of the interpretation of ahruf. And sab'a, obviously, in my understanding, just means multi. It's like there's a dynamism to it, and it's multiple. It's not restricted. But yeah, but this wasn't. I'm more interested right now in presenting this understanding of yours and presenting what Ghamidi Saab has to say, because I find it very interesting as well, and I wanted to really truly understand it. But I just put that out there just for people that because I have on Monday nights been expressing my view in case they think, it's Mufti Saab confusing us. He's saying one thing there and here. But there's a question here I want to ask you, Dr. Saab, and that is that, with this view that the Quran was just one, it was static always, it was absolutely the way we have the Mus'haf today, the Quran, it was the Qira'atul Amma, and it just happened to coincide with Hafs and Asim, and all the other manuscripts were people's best attempts at getting it right, but they didn't really. Do you expect, like as for non-Muslims, Orientalists, Islam, even Islam critics who may not be against Islam, do you, their question will be that, do you really expect us to buy that? I mean, is that not way too convenient of a
Hmm.
response?
Well, you see, I think that the conclusion is not as important as the reasoning which the conclusion offers. I think, regardless of what the conclusion is, we should analyze the reasoning of what led us to form this opinion. It would have its own flaws. No one is perfect, and I'm sure there must be a lot of flaws. So I think instead of approaching through the result, the approach must be through the reasoning which led us to this result. It's not like a reverse engineering in which you see that because the result is very convenient and hence you think that it was something maybe already engineered. So I think in the first place, truths are very simple and often they are right below your nose and you tend to overlook them because you think that something more complicated should have been there. And truths are generally very simple. And the second thing, as I said, is that it's basically the process of reasoning which has led us by for example, presenting the fact that the Surah Qiyamah verses had a specific meaning which eluded a lot of our tabi'un and our later generations because they stuck to a particular interpretation of those Surah Qiyamah verses, which was in the light of an athar attributed to Ibn Abbas, which itself I have shown is not very soundly attributed to him. It has a lot of flaws in it, not only it's not, but the content as well. But because of the fact that our Muslim Ummah has been more hadith centric, and they think that they cannot understand the Quran unless a hadith is presented and they cannot go against it. So that particular Surah Qiyamah verse remained in oblivion for a long time until a scholar came along and said, well, it's so simple that you've just missed the point, you've missed the bus, and you've taken the wrong bus. So it's like a person coming along and telling you that, hey, look, open up your eyes. There is some new reality before you. And of course, we don't expect people to immediately fall for that because, as I said, it's centuries and 14 centuries old view which we are pitted against. So therefore, if someone has a different view, we should analyze it. We are not very, it's not an ambition that people should accept it. The only thing is that if the thing is not cogent, then we would expect an academic answer, an academic critique that would be the most important and the most welcoming thing, which will help us also build upon our flaws. And it's like a combined quest. It's not my quest. It's like Mufti Abu Lababa and many other people pooling in and presenting their view, analyzing it, and critiquing some part of it, telling us that, for example, this argument is flawed or this argument is correct. And it's like a combined effort that we should put forth without claiming ourselves that we are the ones who have discovered something. It's just a humble presentation done by Farai Saab as a student of the Quran. And if you think it is incorrect, it would be befitting and very, very welcoming if we are made known that, for example, this is how it doesn't go against many of the accepted principles. So I think the approach is important and not the result.
No, of course, and the methodology, like you're saying, is paramount. I've, in my understanding, and I've said this on my Monday nights with Mufti's show, that look, I felt that the problem, I know recently this has become a hot topic and it's bothering people, but I felt that this is not the problem. The problem is that we have to unlearn some of the things we've learnt. And in my understanding, and this is obviously slightly different, in my understanding that in the 19th century especially and the early 20th century, with the rise of modernity and colonialism, there was and this part's a fact. I mean, it's not that's not my opinion, that there was a global kind of with people of religion, especially Muslims and some Christians, there was this attempt to entrench themselves further into fundamentalism to stabilize their identity in the face of modernity. So you start seeing a rise of fundamentalism, and a lot of slogans like Islam is a way of life, Islam is the solution to all your problems, Islam is this. And in contrast to the manifesto of modernity or colonialism or the Bible, the Quran is absolutely vowel for vowel. What we have has been preserved to its very dot. I felt that it was that era that really cemented this creed. And now what's happening is, as information is generally become more accessible and certain manuscripts are being found, it's become bothersome. But I felt that this slogan in and of itself was not actually a traditional slogan that early Muslims had. They kind of were quite comfortable with saying, look, so what if it varies? It's still the same Quran in essence. It's kind of like saying and I've given this example of saying, like, in chemistry, things are, from a molecular perspective, they're either solids, fluids, or gases. But then you do, under certain circumstances, you could get like potassium, which is a solid, but under a certain temperature, it could atomically also be a liquid and a solid simultaneously. So the Quran for them was preserved, whilst at the same time allowing differences. So it's like, that was just food for thought. That's how I kind of saw this. But yeah, I'd like to come to some questions, and I know it is very late over there, Dr. Saab, but I think people would love to kind of be able to pick your brains on some of these things. So if we could take some questions. Right. Somebody said, right. Let me just bring up these questions. Right, people, if you've got some questions, you can feel free to post them. I'll get Dr. Saab to, inshallah, respond to them as much as is possible. Somebody said, I don't think people should discount Western academia, and you should look at it without a confirmation bias. That what you're doing, is this in essence a confirmation bias?
So you see, it's not something that we have being at because of some Western criticism or maybe something which they have brought before us. Much before that, we are alive to the situation. We already know about these variations. It is only in the last maybe 250 years in which the West has become much more aware of what's going on. Before that, they didn't even know. As I said in my quest, it was never a question which was put forth to me by some Western scholar. It was a question that was put forth to me by my own sources, by my own history books, by my own hadith books. So I think it's my problem is not as much as an external influence or an external agenda. It's basically my belief or my view that I wanted to examine. I found out that these inconsistencies, that the way they have been reported in our history and hadith books, they are in fact there. And the other thing, as you also said, Mufti Saab, that these Western scholars have done nothing but to extract those things from our own books and present them before us and tell them that, look here, you say that the Quran is a preserved book, and you say that God said, I'm going to preserve this. So either the claim is incorrect or this data is incorrect. One thing has to be wrong because this data speaks the opposite. So either you disown the data and stick to the claim, or you own the data and forsake the claim. So what we did in our history was that we stuck to both contradictory things. We said, no, this is the correct data, and the Quran is also preserved. And we gave a shut-up call to speak, so to speak, and we snubbed them, and we said that we are better equipped to answer our own problems. You go away. And they did not realize that the Quran is not a book just for Muslims. It's a book for mankind. So if someone from mankind poses this question, it is our responsibility to give it answer, not to give a shut-up call. And we have to tell them that it is a book in which we, as people who would like to read the final book of God, the way it was revealed, we have certain questions that are unresolved in our mind. And therefore, it's a personal quest. It's a personal journey that started off this whole project.
Sure, shukran. Dr. Saab, a question that if Allah has taken it upon himself to preserve the Quran, let's say we're taking this verse, Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. Now, in that case, if let's say and the understanding is really the qira'at, the Quran, the Quran is, let's say, what we have today, Hafs and Asim. But the fact that we have these other qira'at and the mainstream kind of popularized view is like, let's say, oh, it's all mutawatir and all these different things, then in and of itself, is that not a kind of lack of preservation? Because could Allah have not preserved it without this confusion?
So you see, this is where we have to understand perhaps the scheme of God. The scheme of God is that He has given people the ikhtiyar, the discretion to do what they like. He's not put a stop to how people behave and the way they react. We have a very similar scenario in hadith as well, in which people at times have worked up hadith, at times they have misreported the Prophet, at times they have misrepresented the Prophet. The Almighty never stopped that, because you see, in the human paradigm, His task was to preserve His bit. And His task was not to undo what other people were doing, because that was part of their own mechanics. So the Almighty, what He said and what He claimed was that I, for my part, have done what I was liable to. And you, for your part, have been given this opportunity that there is this preserved Quran. Now you have to work your way towards it. And there are going to be obstructions, there are going to be problems, but then it's not that it's unresolvable. The only thing that is that you have to have that quest for the truth, and you'll reach that truth. Barring that, what the other things which exist in the name of the Quran, of course, these are the impediments which are caused by human intellect, by human approach, by human error. And this is something which the Almighty has tolerated in every human's affair. Whether it's religion, whether it's non-religious affairs, this is where the test comes from. This is where the Almighty's scheme is basically. He's not driving people to do what right or wrong is. He's given us the choice to do. The only thing is that he's done his bit by preserving what he thinks is the real Quran, or what he is the real Quran.
Shukran. For those of you asking, right, about me, I mean, my understanding is that this, what we have today, the Quran, is from the Quran, which would be an umbrella kind of revelation, which allowed variations. So what we have from it is from it, but there would have been other ways to have read it as well that may have disappeared either with the Prophet, shortly after, maybe generations after. But this is also it. But this is not, in my understanding, it isn't the only thing there ever was, but it is one way of reading it. So that's my understanding. So for those of you asking, here was a quick question for Dr. Saab. I think this would be very straightforward. Somebody had asked that the question: if you were to write a blank, if you were given a blank mushaf and you were to rewrite the Quran, how would it look today? I mean, in your understanding, it would look absolutely verbatim like the mushaf today. Anyway, that's
Absolutely. Hmm.
absolutely. And to be honest with you, that question, even though I do believe in the dynamism of the Quran, but in that understanding, I too would just be doing exactly the same thing because it is the Quran in my understanding as well. So, right, okay. Here's another question, Dr. Saab. The verse of Rajam.
Hmm.
Uh, how do you explain that coming in some of the ahadith that Sayyidina Umar or other people felt it was a verse of the Quran? What is your thoughts on
Right.
this?
So I think here again I've cited Hamiduddin Farahi Saab. He has actually presented a solution, and he has said that basically Rajam is something which is based on the Quran, although it's not exactly uh, found in words in the Quran. The Surah Maida, I think it's verse 33 or 34, which says, "In the Lazina yuharibunullah wa Rasulahu," the famous Muharaba verse, which says that people who indulge in Muharaba, one of their it prescribes four punishments for them, and the first of them is an yuqattalu, and the second one is au yusallabu. So yuqattalu means to kill someone in an exemplary way, and that, of course, rajam is something in which you kill someone to make that person an example that he did something really bad. For example, he raped women or maybe raped children. So one of the punishments of muharba is that. So when Umar anhu was talking about that Rajam verse, he was not talking about a verse which mentioned Rajam by name. He was in all probability referring to the fact that this Rajam, the verse of Surah Maida on which the Prophet derived Rajam, is something which is always there. It was not something of a separate verse. It was a derivative of that verse. So Umar actually was referring to that, and I have shown in my in that article, which relates to it's a chapter called "Incompleteness of the Quran," in which the Rajam verse is discussed. I have shown how this Muharaba verse was the one which Umar was referring to, and people mistook it for the Rajam verse, a sheikh or sheikhatu, which of course is something which is not even in the Quran.
I see. Sheikh, do you feel it was then abrogated or it still continues as an
I think
exemplary?
a sheikh or sheikha is not even it's
No,
Arabic. I've
no,
discussed.
not the verse, the Rajam
There,
itself.
so it's there. It's still there. Even
Okay,
today,
still
if you
okay.
want to exemplary punish someone for these extreme crimes that they do, a qattala means to kill someone in an
Hmm.
exemplary way, and rajam is one form of that exemplary punishment. It's still
Sure.
there.
Okay, sure. I mean, just for people who may be familiar with my views, and I've explained it in the past, Sheikh, slightly differently. My understanding has been that Rajam was never introduced by the Prophet, but in the Hadith in Sahih Muslim, it's condoned from the Jewish practice when the Prophet says, "Okay, remove your hand," and they say, "Well, what are you covering up about stoning?" Now, uh, it was condoned until the verse of the Quran was revealed. In my understanding, that about lashing for the
Mhm.
wazaniyat was now here. And the proof I felt that the verses that follow after that, when Allah speaks about the slaves, He says that وَعَلَى الْمُحْسَنَاتِ نِصْفٌ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ, that those who are married slaves will only get half the punishment, and there's no such thing as half of stoning. Now, that said, in the Maliki madhab, there were certain scholars in the 800s, especially Abu Qasim al Burzuli, who was in northwest Africa, and he was one of the Shaykh al Islams of his time. Now, Burzuli's fatwa, in line with the Maliki madhab and Maqasid, is that the Sharia mandates that the hudud change. So he had, at that point, it caused a huge debate, but he had actually he said it wasn't him. He was saying that the Sharia is mandating itself that because the day and age has changed, all the hudud would change. So they substituted them with financial penalties. So there was him, there was quite a few of his kind of students as well. And then this carried on in northwest Africa for a while. In the east, with Suleiman al Qanuni from the Ottomans, who substituted the hudud with other penalties. So my understanding was these things with trajectory hermeneutics do change, but that's just to, and I would in the future at some point love to kind of, because I'm not sure exactly what Ghamidi Saab's view is on these things. I've heard some of his clips, but they're not. I just haven't fully grasped if he's saying exactly what I'm saying, or if he's saying that they should just be suspended today because they don't match up to the day and age. I'm not sure if you do want to comment or we want to leave that for another day.
We can for that, because that would need some more detail. Of course, we have a view regarding Islamic punishments. I think they are still valid. The only thing is there are certain conditions which need to be met, and these are ultimate forms of reproof. And as far as Rajam is concerned, it is absolutely erroneously understood that it's just meant for married adulterers. That is something which is an error of interpretation that has resulted. Rajam is meant for a lot of things which relate to Muharaba and Fasad fil Ard. And one form is that a person does not, deserve any lenience when he commits this act. So people thought that Rajam is meant for only adulterers who are married. And here we actually have a different approach. Other than that, as far as all the hududs are concerned, we have a specific view, and if you would like to talk about it, that could be a whole topic. But
Sure. I mean, yeah, that's absolutely amazing. A quick another question going back to the topic by Joe Blogs. Salam, how much importance do you give to the sanad of Huffaz, which trace back to the Prophet, i.e., isnad from someone who memorized from someone? So in the Quran they also have this sanad as well, like an ijaza. How much importance, Joe is asking, do you give to that sanad?
so the only importance is that that person is testifying that my teacher was this person and who read it from the other person. It does not have any importance as far as authenticating a text in its totality is concerned, because you see that preservation is by a vast number of people who are doing the same thing. All the huffaz taken together. One hafiz taken singularly has no significance, because that is like a drop among in the ocean. So it's like the whole ocean contributing to one thing. So taking it separately would not be of any significance. But when it forms part of a greater chain, of course, it has huge significance.
Yeah, that's very well said. Very well said, Dr. Saab. MashaAllah. Just somebody had just asked me again. I suppose this is just for me. They'd asked me about if the criteria was met today, would I advocate? Would I advocate chopping the hand? I wouldn't, because according to me, all of this, the Sharia with maqasid, it's already changed. Like I have a whole video on trajectory hermeneutics. So, in my understanding and that of these Malikis, Abul Qasim al-Burzuli in the past, and these scholars, the Sharia hudud have changed. So they would be whatever the day and age. So today, punishment, jail, sentences, and fines, and things like this. Okay, the question somebody's asked, Dr. Saab, Vanir has asked, Ibn Mas'ud's version of the Quran, do you believe it was substantially different from the common Qira'ah and the Quran we have today?
Absolutely not, because I have shown in my book that the narratives which are ascribed to Ibn Masud, as per which he did not find Surah Fatiha or the Mu'awwidhatayn to be part of the Quran, they are erroneously ascribed to him, and they have problems in their description, they have problems in their isnad, they have problems in their content. And Abdullah ibn Masud and Ubay ibn Ka'b and all the major companions, they actually vouched for the same Quran. And we even have people like I'm forgetting the name. Yes, I got the name. Ka'b al-Kurzi. He was a Tabi'i of the second century. He said that I found three Qurans in which the one of them was Abdullah ibn Abbas, the other one was from Ubay ibn Ka'b, and the third one was from Abdullah ibn Masud, and none of them differed anywhere. They had exactly the same number of verses, and they were total matching to each other. So I think that as far as Abdullah ibn Masud is concerned, he's been wrongly understood.
And these, you guys can't see, but these were the pages. I'd been going through that just the other day, all on Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's variation of the Quran, and you do that very well. And as a brief summary, I mean, it does speak about that. There's nothing clear that what the debate was about. Was it the Mu'awwidhatayn? Because could it be that none of his students transmit from, and even though 2-3 of them do briefly, but they don't. Nobody really, this should be a known thing, shouldn't it? And I love how you brought it down in through some of the riwayat, showing that was the difference on the word qul in the Mu'awwidhatayn. That's an absolute gem. I thought that was an amazing part. That's through some narrations. They were discussing the qul of qul, qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas or qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq. So was that the part of the revelation or not? And was this Ibn Mas'ud's contention? But once again, that is in great detail mentioned in the book. Right, does the Quran not have, okay, I don't know if that's a legitimate question. Does the Quran not have copyright laws?
It does not.
It does not have copyright laws, people. I'm surprised. The idea that Dr. Shahin said, the idea is that one must have valid chains of narration to become really popular, since common people don't usually care for chains of narration for the Quran. I'm not sure where the question is in that. Okay, so on manuscripts not having the Hafs Qira'ah, I think it's probably to do with the fact that by the time people started putting diacritic marks, is it like, I suppose the question is the variations in the Quran because of not having diacritic marks?
So one of the reasons, as I said, that there are several reasons. I have enumerated them in my book. So another reason is because of the lack of diacritical marks, there was some similarity in words as well, sanctioned by the isnad. You see, ta'lamun and ya'lamun was, of course, because of the fact that the diacritic was not present above and below, and both had an isnad traced back to the Prophet as well. So you could have read ta'lamun and you could have read ya'lamun. And of course, in the absence of these diacritic marks, and because of the fact that both readings were ascribed to the Prophet, we have to have some other preferential criteria, and that was exercised as well. So
Okay.
that's possible.
Excellent. The person repeating that, we've already answered the question on Rajim, and yes, to be clear, it's not. There's no verse in the Quran of Rajim. Neither do you. Nobody would say that because it's not a verse in the Quran. What you were referring to, just to be clear for the person, was that the verse on Muharaba and these things could incorporate the concept of Rajam. Not that the verse of Rajam is in that verse. It's not. Just to be clear, Dr. Saab wasn't saying that the actual verse of Rajam is there. Right, okay. Somebody's asked, okay, I'll take, some people are saying don't ignore the Facebook questions. I'm not, because I've got both of them open here, YouTube, Facebook. If the Quranic language, do you believe it to be miraculous? And how are there multiple versions if it is miraculous? I mean, do you, people say the Quran is a miracle. Is it a miracle? And why? How so? Because people today are asking this question. I know that could be an incredibly detailed. I understand that, but I mean, are there some pointers you would just put out straight away? Do you feel like some people say numerical value? They say mathematical matrices. They say, do you feel these things also reflect that or not?
I would not say. I don't think so. That the mathematical relationship and some of the other things which people have said. I think it's a linguistic miracle. The way the language has been employed, the way it has been arranged, the way the verses have been set apart, and the way the whole discourse progresses, it speaks for itself that it cannot be a human composition. So you see, when you speak about a miracle, you actually say something which is beyond human approach. And it does look like the Quran when it speaks of the philosophy it speaks of, the language in which that philosophy is couched, the manner in which certain details are presented. So that has a cumulative effect to make it a piece of literature in which, of course, it cannot be copied. It cannot be emulated in any sense of the word. So its miraculous nature actually depends on its linguistic aspect, in which it's a miracle in itself.
Sure, excellent. I mean, and those people, in my response, just to kind of add to Dr. Saab, where I'd been asked about, is the Quran a miracle? I had said, yes, it is a miracle, but it's not a miracle in the sense it depends what we mean by miracle. To me, I've said yes, it is a miracle on a number of factors. One is a subjective experience that a person has when reading the Quran, that is sublime, the kind of the impact it has. Two, how it has motivated and served as the backbone of a civilization is nothing short of a miracle. Now, in these senses, I've said that the Quran is a miracle, not in the sense that, like some people are saying, look, it proves something scientific, therefore only God could have come up with something that speaks about, let's say, I don't know, the aspect of embryology, or they're saying this could not have been understood by anybody. To me, those parts are amazing, yes, but they're not necessary. I wouldn't say that is the miracle per se. I would say the miraculous nature is more, one, to do with the subjective, two, to do with the social aspect of what it did with Islam and it continues to do, and three, I would say I have been wowed from the linguistic perspective by certain things like I have been wowed, one, by the composition, of course, and its impact, but even certain things like how the Quran, like when people have looked at it today and they've said that, by the way, it has an equal mention of, let's say, dunya and akhirah spread out over the Quran. It has an equal mention of those of belief and those of disbelief spread out, not like juxtaposed, because that would be easy if I said, by the way, dunya and akhirah, because I'm saying them together. But if you take the whole Quran, it reflects a balance still. This mizan that you can find, I feel that if you do hold, let's say, with these kind of things, this symmetry, because symmetry is one of the highest forms of aesthetic beauty in this world. If you do feel that this was invented by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but as certain, let's say, non-Muslims would feel, okay, it was the invention of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it would mean that he was, of a genius beyond comprehension. So that's, to me, that to just get this so spot on in place, I find that wow. So in this sense, wow, a miracle, not in the sense that is bending the laws of nature, but yeah, just to somebody saying, right, no, that's, yeah, that you've already answered the question on the Qira'at, and which Qira'ah was first introduced in India or the Indian subcontinent. Are you? I don't know. I'm not sure if that's something.
So it was the Qira'atul Amma. You see,
Okay.
that was the Qira'at which had the advent of that Qira'at took place very earlier on, when Hafs was not even born. I mean, that's about the second century of Islam, when he was living, and he died in around 169 AH, which itself shows that the Qira'at of Hafs later came to be dubbed. The Qira'atul Amma later came to be dubbed as the Qira'at of Hafs. So I think that the Qur'an, which entered the subcontinent, and it went over to Malaysia and to Indonesia and some of the Far East countries, it was the Qira'atul Amma. And I've also shown in my book that you'll see that the territories of Ajam, the non-Arab territories, all of them had the Qira'atul Amma, or which we now call as the Qira'atul Hafs. It was only in the Arab territories where these Arab scholars existed, in which they would battle, or they would have those contests in which various qira'at would be read, and they would be preserved in their own books, that we have that area of the Aqalim al-Arab, which has those qira'at. As far as the Aqalim al-Ajam are concerned, the non-Arab countries, you'll find that none of them have these variations, simply because it was the masses who came and brought the qira'at with them, and the masses always had the qira'atul amma. So you can even make a rule that whenever the scholars were introduced first, and they were the ones who went to a territory, it was always the ilmul khassa, or the qira'atul khassa, or the qira'at of a particular imam. But wherever the masses came first, as a conquest maybe, or maybe like, for example, they were business people who went to Indonesia. In all these countries, it was the qira'atul amma which was always prevalent.
Right. And somebody's asked, once again, we have covered this, but they've asked, so simply put, are you saying the Quran is preserved perfectly as it was revealed? And
Yes, I
after,
do.
Yes, absolutely, categorically. So the Quran was preserved, and to sum that up, what Dr. Saab has um, expansively researched in his book, and he's got a whole series of lectures as well available on YouTube about that as well, about the whole nature of the Quran and topics related to the Quran. But to sum this up, what we've been discussing and your points of view today, it is safe to say, Dr. Saab, that the Quran, from what you're teaching, the Quran has been preserved perfect. I would say most Muslims agree absolutely on that point, that the Quran has been preserved. But you're saying it's been preserved. This recitation we have today was the recitation. I mean, it was the recitation
Right.
of the Prophet ﷺ and of the Quran as it was set
Hmm.
um, in the with the finality in the final year of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This was set. This was called the Qira'atul Amma. This is what was transmitted. The consonantal kind of template that Uthman provided did allow for certain variations of reading that may be like where you place vowels, which may have led to, which was partly contributed to what became the different qira'at, in addition to other variables you've mentioned as well. But this Hafs and Asim was the qira'atul amma. All Hafs did was he didn't kind of do any of that ijtihad or take any adopt any choices, ikhtiyarat. He just went with the qira'atul amma. That's why it correlates perfectly. Any manuscripts that are being found today, they are simply reflecting those qira'at, but they are not the Quran, which is what we have today preserved in the books. And as you've mentioned, the lands of the Ajam, where people went from, ground up, they bottom up. They did have this general qira'ah. This is what you're saying. So,
Right.
right, okay. So I think that's. I know we've taken up so much of your time, Dr. Saab, and I'm so grateful for you for sharing this time with us, because I seriously can't repeat that enough. Karriru shukr ala shukr, that I'm so indebted for that. I would love to, inshallah, do a follow up session if we can at some point, where I'd love to go over the main themes you've discussed in your book. This book, The History of the Quran, a Critical Study by Dr. Shehzad Saleem. It is available. I saw it on Kindle. I did purchase the Kindle copy as well, and then I purchased the original from. I couldn't actually find it on Amazon, but by the way, the hard copy. So I'm not sure if that's something you're going to provide to Amazon. But I eventually found it from the Mawrid website. Is there another place they can order it as well, or is that the best place?
In the US, it's available at Amazon. I'm not sure why the UK Amazon does not have it, because it has been sent to the Amazon
Okay.
website. So people have been buying in the US, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it's not in the UK. But as you said, that the Mawrid website, it has a number as well. So maybe you
So
can
yeah,
call them up.
so I mean, because I wanted a hard copy and I got the Kindle one from Amazon, and then I found it on Mawrid website, and it came. To be fair, it came pretty fast. They sent it very fast, so dispatched it. It's definitely for anybody who's a serious student in this field, like somebody who wants to take this seriously, and they kind of into studying about Islam. Because if you're an absolute beginner, it might be overwhelming. I get that. But if you're somebody who takes, some interest in some deep learning of Islam, then it is a must. I would definitely advise that you kind of purchase it, you buy it.
So there is another summary that I've written of this book. It's a very short executive summary. It's called Islam, a concise study of the history of the Quran. So it's like a mini version of this book.
Oh, right.
Um,
Okay.
People who would not like to go in very many details. So it's like a 150-page summary of what this
Wow.
bigger book speaks about. It's called History of the Quran, a concise study.
Wow. Okay, people. So that's for all of you then. Those of you who want to go deeper, a critical study, and those of you that want just an understanding, a concise study. I would say, look, even if you don't 100% agree with the understanding, you have a slightly different interpretation, it's still a must to read through, because this, what I found and what I loved about it, obviously it's academic, it's full of ilm, but it's not dogmatic. You're not being okay, this is how it is, people. You're being like, look, okay, this is the discussion, the Mus'haf of, let's say, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. This is the topic. These are all the narrations. This is what such and such has said. This is what such and such. Let's evaluate all of these. And then there's just an objective kind of conclusion, which is not preachy. It's not kind of pushing it down people's throats. It's just saying, look, this is my finding. You take it or leave it. Imsakun bi ma'rufin or tasrihun bi ihsan. It's very much like that. That's why I totally loved that. I would love to, if in the future your schedule is available over the main topics, the chapters in this, if we could get a discussion, I think people would benefit immensely. And people, if you till then can buy the book, it would really help your own development and learning. Dr. Saab, if people want to reach out to you, where is the best place to reach out to you?
Well, I've got an email. I've got a WhatsApp number. They're most welcome. I can give that number and email.
Are you sure you want to do that, Dr. Saab? I don't want you to get spammed, or I don't want you to...
You see, this is with this that I mean, I do answer all sorts of questions, but because I have 4 live sessions every week.
Wow.
So I do encourage participants that if they have a general question, it's more related to those topics that I'm teaching. Otherwise, if they have a specific question regarding the history of the Quran, because it's my passion, so I always I would give preference to people who have such a question, because it's a very, very complicated debate and it needs a lot of thrashing out, I would say.
Where do you have these sessions for the viewers? You have them on Facebook?
I have them on Facebook and on my Zoom program.
Sure. I mean, what's your profile names, and if you want to share your email and if you want to share your mobile number, by all means, go for it. Whatever you want to share now for the viewers. I'm just, it's just, I'd be like, WhatsApp number. Oh no, people would be just. But I mean, that's really, I have to love I love the openness, Dr. Saab. That's amazing.
So I can give you the number and the email. If, how do you want it? I mean,
so I mean, first of all, with the Facebook profiles, it's just with your name. Is it Shehzad Saleem, Dr. Shehzad Saleem?
So I think there are 2 Facebook profiles. One is by the name of Shehzad Saleem. That's my personal profile. But the public profile goes by the name of Dr. Shehzad Saleem, I think. Yeah. And it says something like video talks of Dr. Shehzad Saleem. If you just type this, you'll get that public profile.
Shehzad Saleem, as I've written it on and I will be also sharing it on my Facebook page as well, your page, so people get that. And the email address, that if people want to reach out to you.
It is shehzad.saleem99 @gmail.
There you go.
SHEH.
Shehzad.saleem99 @gmail.com. Right, and people are saying we need the doctor's number, Mufti. If you want to, this is only no pressure from me, Dr. Saab.
Yeah, but
if you want,
just make this much should be clear that the WhatsApp number is basically for questions regarding the history of the Quran, and if you have other questions, then I would refer them to the 4 forums that I take my classes on. So yes, I can give that WhatsApp number, but just for the history of the Quran questions.
Sure. Okay, go for it.
So it's 0092.
Okay.
300. 0092 or plus 92 300.
0092. Yep.
300.
300.
842.
842.
4481.
4481. People, I've put that into the comments. There you go. It's on the YouTube comments. Please be respectful of Dr. Saab. Only genuine. Do not, anything. Don't pester him. Don't kind of just harass Dr. Saab. Don't kind of you have to value people who've dedicated, decades of their lives to studying the Quran to make it easier for other people out there. So do respect that, please. Right, Dr. Saab, would you like to give any final message to the viewers before we wrap it up for you? I know it's really late. By the way, Dr. Saab's in Pakistan currently, so you can imagine it's late over there. It's not a vampire like us.
So my final message would be that I think our responsibility is to become seekers of the truth, and the way to seek the truth is critical thinking. Don't take things for granted. Don't take things because they've been told to you by the society or by your clergy or by your parents. Question everything, analyze everything, because in the end, God is going to hold you answerable for what you believe and not what others believe. And always stick to your opinions on the basis of reasoning and not on the basis of emotions or dogma.
Sure. Very beautifully said. Shukran once again. I'm ever so grateful. You know, may Allah preserve you, bless you, grant you great health. I know right now it's a bit hectic in Pakistan as well with the whole COVID situation. It seems to have erupted a bit later compared to,
Hmm.
you know, the rest of the globe.
Right.
So,
Hmm.
you know, may Allah keep you and your family in great health. Dearly appreciate this, and we've got to follow this up. Definitely, you know, Janta ka demand hai. There's so much, so many
Inshallah,
people.
we'll do
Cool.
that.
So have a great night, Dr. Saab, and the rest of you
Okay.
people. Much love. I'm going to put up my final page. Like, subscribe, share. Any comments, leave them. If you want to reach out to me, you can use any of the forums. Instagram is probably the best one. Other than that, people, much love as always. Take very good care of yourselves. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.